my girlfriend of 5 years, whom I loved deeply, testified falsely in court to protect her first love, sending me to prison. After enduring 3 years of torment behind bars, I completely let go of my feelings for her. I calmly handed her divorce papers, ignoring her tightly clasped hands with her first love in front of me. She thought I was playing hard to get and sneered mockingly. "Save it. You think divorce can threaten me? You should be on your knees thanking me that I'm still willing to have you." Ding. Story Shots reminds you to click the subscribe button at the bottom right corner to read the full novel. On the day of my release, Audrey Thornton parked her bright red sports car outside the prison gates. The officer who escorted me out couldn't help but tease. "You two must still be on good terms. 3 years inside, and your wife still comes to pick you up herself." I gave a bitter smile, not telling him that I had Audrey to thank for my 3-year stint behind bars. Audrey impatiently honked the horn at me, frowning as she urged, "What are you dawdling for? Hurry up and get in. I've got work to do at the company." The business I had painstakingly built up was now being referred to as hers without a second thought. Seeing my simple attire, Audrey rolled her eyes again, looking at me with disdain. Though she hadn't visited me once in 3 years, her expression of disgust was all too familiar. A pang of hurt shot through my heart as I wondered why I had ever fallen so hopelessly in love with her, walking right into her trap. I approached the passenger side, but when I opened the door, I was shocked to see Garrett Worthington, Audrey's first love, sitting there. Garrett smiled and waved at me, flashing his pearly white teeth. "Eamon, old chap, 3 years gone by and you're looking quite the seasoned gent now, aren't you?" I instinctively furrowed my brow, my fists clenching tightly. Perhaps my reaction angered Audrey. She grabbed her handbag and hurled it at me. The cold metal chain struck my forehead, instantly drawing blood. I clutched my head in pain as Audrey's accusations filled my ears. "Did those 3 years in prison addle your brain? Can't you see there's someone in the passenger seat? And what's with that attitude? Garrett's greeting you and all you can do is stand there like an idiot. Is that what they taught you in prison?" Yes, she knew full well I had just spent 3 years locked up. For those 3 years, as the newest inmate, I endured endless abuse from my fellow prisoners. I was forced to take on all the work, leaving me exhausted, underfed, and poorly clothed. During the worst times, I could only curl up by the cold toilet door, unable to even sleep. The fear of being engulfed in darkness day and night came flooding back to me. Garrett quickly began rubbing Audrey's back to calm her down, pulling her into his arms. Now, Audrey darling, don't get worked up over some lowlife. It's not worth risking your health over. Besides, Eamon's just been released. He's probably forgotten how to interact with people. We can teach him proper manners over time." Audrey nodded at him, her entire demeanor softening. She cooed gently, "I just can't stand seeing him take advantage of your good nature like this. If it weren't for him, you wouldn't have had to go through all those awful things back then." As she said this, Audrey glared at me viciously, as if I were truly the one who had done wrong. Garrett stroked Audrey's head, smiling as he reassured her. "It's all right, darling. We've made it through the hardest times already." Audrey buried her face in Garrett's chest, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Thank you for staying by my side, Garrett." Shortly after my marriage to Audrey Thornton, Garrett Worthington returned to the country. During that period, Audrey was often absent-minded, leaving early and returning late, with her attitude towards me deteriorating. Until one day, she took the initiative to prepare a candlelit dinner, waiting for me at home. I was pleasantly surprised, thinking she had finally had a change of heart. After all, before that day, she would come home every night with a strong scent of men's cologne. I had even overheard her crying on the phone to Garrett, saying she missed him. Audrey enthusiastically poured me glass after glass of wine. I gradually became intoxicated by her seemingly gentle demeanor. Little did I know she would take advantage of my inebriated state to use my fingerprint to access the company's internal system. That night, Audrey had been orchestrating a sinister plot. It turned out that after returning to the country, Garrett had entered the same industry as my company. However, I had already captured the local market share, leaving him with no foothold. Even worse, due to his misguided investments, Garrett had accrued enormous high-interest debts. To help him, Audrey went so far as to misuse my authority to falsify the company's accounts. Later, she personally reported me and appeared in court to give false testimony. 5 years of love, 3 years in prison. I could never have imagined that the price of trusting the wrong person would be repaying with 8 years of my youth. Audrey drove the car to our former home. Only now, where our wedding photo once stood, it had been replaced with a picture of Audrey and Garrett. In the photo, they looked like a loving couple. I walked into the house carrying my light luggage, and the next moment, I came face to face with Winifred, the housekeeper. Winifred had been by my side helping me since I started my business. It could be said that she had long regarded me as her own son. Winifred looked at me with surprise at first, then her eyes quickly welled up with emotion. "Sir, you're finally out of prison." "Ahem, Winifred?" Audrey's displeased voice sounded from behind. Winifred immediately apologized. "I'm sorry, madam." I watched in shock as Winifred, with a pained expression, walked up to Audrey and Garrett and bowed to them. She then respectfully said, "Sir, madam, you're back." Audrey's expression finally softened. Go prepare dinner." With that, she linked arms with Garrett and entered the master bedroom. Only then did Winifred dare to whisper a few words to me. She took out all her savings from her pocket and handed them to me, saying with some guilt, "I'm sorry, sir. This is all I can do for you." It was clear that in the years I'd been away, Winifred had suffered no small amount of exploitation from Audrey and Garrett. She had been forced to acknowledge Garrett as the master of the house. At Winifred's insistence, I reluctantly accepted the money, assuring her that this situation would soon come to an end. In the evening, I was assigned by Audrey to sleep in the storage room. The room had long been unused, filled with dust and a faint musty smell. However, after 3 years of prison life, this room seemed like heaven compared to a cell. Still, I couldn't help but sneeze several times upon entering. Audrey remarked indifferently, "You know, Garrett is very kind-hearted and likes to keep pets. A few dogs used to live here before. But I suppose an ex-con like you should be grateful to even have a place like this to stay." Garrett couldn't help but laugh. "Audrey, darling, how can you compare Eamon to dogs?" Audrey gave me a contemptuous look and threatened in a low voice, "Eamon Fairchild, you'd better stay put here tonight, or I'll make sure you don't even have a place fit for dogs to stay." With that, she covered her mouth, and she and Garrett shared a quiet laugh. If I had seen Audrey treat me like this 3 years ago, I would have been heartbroken and unable to sleep all night. But now I felt nothing at all. After all, I had long since made up my mind to divorce her, and more importantly, to reclaim everything that was once mine. Right in front of me, Garrett Worthington cupped Audrey Thornton's face in his hands and said in a deep voice, "Audrey, now that Eamon has returned, I should, by all rights, give you back to him. But I find I simply can't do it. Audrey, I've realized that you're the only one I've ever truly loved." His words struck Audrey's heart with pinpoint accuracy. 4 years, Garrett Worthington had been the unforgettable first love she'd kept hidden in her heart. Audrey's eyes immediately welled up with tears. "Garrett, I love you too. Only you. Don't worry. I'll clear away any obstacles for us. We'll always be together." Audrey confessed her feelings passionately, completely ignoring my presence. As the atmosphere between them grew increasingly intimate, with them seemingly on the verge of embracing and kissing, I closed the door in disgust, shutting them out. But by midnight, I was awakened by the sound of low, heavy breathing. Just from the noise, I could tell these two were expressing their most intense emotions without any attempt to hide it. It was truly sickening. I threw on a coat and walked out of the house. Outside, the moon was bright and full, reminding me of the night Audrey and I had become a couple. That night, she had happily wrapped her arms around my neck, vowing under the moon's witness that she would be mine and mine alone for life. How times had changed. Without realizing it, I found myself outside a tea house. Despite the late hour, the lights were still on inside. I pondered the tea house's sign for a moment, about to leave when suddenly someone called out to me. Eamon, is that really you? My childhood friend, Lionel Avery, excitedly clapped me on the shoulder and led me into the tea house. After I finished telling Lionel about the day's events, he remained silent for a long while. What a pair of scoundrels! He exclaimed, slamming his teacup onto the table in anger. If it hadn't been for Audrey framing you with those false accounts, you'd never have gone to prison for 3 years. And now she dares to treat you like this. Don't worry, Eamon. I've just taken on a new project. Come work with me on it. With your skills, I'm sure you'll be back on your feet in no time. I took a sip of tea, shaking my head with a slight smile. Lionel, thank you for your kindness, but I've already decided to take back the company from Audrey. I'm afraid I won't be able to be your business partner. Lionel asked with some concern. But it's been 3 years now. Putting this into practice might prove rather difficult. A look of determination flashed in my eyes. Don't worry, I'm confident I can do it. When I said goodbye to Lionel, he gave me a card, telling me to use the money on it for now and to come to him if I ever needed any help. I accepted the card, moved by my brother's gesture, and gave him a hug. On my way home, I stopped at a print shop to personally draft and print out a divorce agreement. By the time I returned home, it was already broad daylight. As soon as I entered, an angry vase shattered at my feet. Audrey's vicious voice rang out. Eamon Fairchild, what are you doing wandering about, you ex-con? Are you trying to embarrass me in front of everyone? Garrett Worthington sat beside Audrey Thornton, holding her hand and gently comforting her. Audrey, darling, don't get upset. Take a deep breath. Ignoring their intimate display, I walked straight up and slammed the divorce papers onto the coffee table. Audrey, let's get a divorce. Audrey's face froze for a moment. She glanced down at the divorce agreement. Then, after a moment, she sneered at me mockingly. Divorce? You really are full of surprises, aren't you? Do you think you can threaten me with divorce? Eamon Fairchild, give it a rest. You should be on your knees thanking me that I'm still willing to have you. I calmly replied, I'm not playing games, Audrey. Divorce is best for both of us. Why continue like this, despising each other? Hearing my words, Garrett's eyes lit up. He pulled Audrey into his arms and whispered in her ear, Audrey, love, it seems Eamon is serious this time. Can you believe someone like him dares to ask you for a divorce? Humph. I say you should dump him first. But Audrey irritably pushed him away. She turned to me, gritting her teeth. Eamon Fairchild, there's a limit to these tricks of yours. Even now, she was still convinced that I would love her helplessly like I did years ago, that I simply couldn't leave her. I couldn't be bothered to waste time on this topic with her, and reiterated, Audrey, I'll say it one last time. I want a divorce. To my surprise, Audrey snatched the divorce papers and angrily tore them to shreds. She pointed at my nose and raged. Eamon Fairchild, you're nothing but a dog I keep now. How dare you ask me for a divorce? Since she'd taken things this far, there was no need for me to be considerate anymore. I smiled coldly, looking down at the two of them. Fine. If we can't resolve this peacefully, don't blame me for taking the gloves off completely. I packed a few belongings and moved out of this nauseating house. Audrey Thornton was still threatening me from behind. Eamon Fairchild, I'm waiting for the day you'll regret this and beg me on your knees. I sneered and walked away without looking back. When Lionel Avery heard I had rented a flat, he brought his sister Elsie Avery to help me settle in. They brought a load of daily necessities, worried I might not have enough to eat or wear. After 3 years of hardship, I could actually manage with just the bare essentials. It had been 3 years since I last saw Elsie, and she had grown into a mature and graceful young woman, truly embodying the aura of a tea house proprietress. But at this moment, she was looking at me with concern in her eyes. Brother Eamon, you've lost so much weight. These 3 years must have been really tough for you. Hearing this, I felt a pang in my heart. Everyone else had been congratulating me on my new lease of life after prison, but only Elsie noticed the hardships I had endured these past 3 years. I sighed softly and ruffled her hair like I would a little sister's. It's all right, it's all in the past now. At the same time, I secretly vowed to make Audrey Thornton and Garrett Worthington pay for what they had done. The Avery siblings insisted on cooking a meal for me as a welcome home dinner. They shooed me to the living room to watch telly while they busied themselves in the kitchen. Soon, the aroma of food wafted through the air. When they led me to the dining table, I was moved to tears by the sight of 6 dishes and a soup. The warmth of home that I had been longing for was given to me by 2 good friends. We were eating and reminiscing about the old days when we struggled together, when suddenly my mobile screen lit up. I opened it to find a WeChat message from Garrett Worthington. It was just one photo. The background was a pub, and against the backdrop of colorful lights, his face was pressed intimately against Audrey's. Lionel, who was sitting next to me, saw the photo and immediately put down his chopsticks in anger. Amen. These adulterers are so shameless. Should I get someone to teach them a lesson? I calmly put my hand on his shoulder, a smile tugging at my lips. You see, I was just about to file for divorce, and here comes the evidence. Elsie immediately understood my meaning and smiled, her eyes crinkling. I tapped out a few provocative messages and sent them. Sure enough, Garrett Worthington couldn't contain himself. He sent several photos in quick succession of himself and Audrey in bed. Even without looking closely, one could see the intimate marks on their bodies. I turned my head away, fighting the nausea as I saved all this evidence. The next morning, I set off for the court to file for divorce. With all the evidence in order, after completing the paperwork, I was told to simply wait for the court's decision. By the time I finished with everything and came out, it was already noon. Without realizing it, I had walked to the building of my company. This company was founded by me single-handedly, and it was as important to me as my own child. But during my time in prison, Audrey had brazenly taken it over as her own. I couldn't help but walk to the entrance of the company, wanting to see what it looked like now. However, I was immediately stopped by the security guard. Where are you from? You can't enter here without permission. This security guard looked unfamiliar. He didn't recognize me at all. Well, after 3 years, I suppose not only the security but many of the employees would have changed too. Wait, don't send him away yet. A voice stopped the security guard. I looked up to see Garrett Worthington with his arm around Audrey Thornton's waist, slowly walking towards me. Ever since I proposed divorce to Audrey, he had been showing a smug look of having succeeded in his scheme. Now he looked even more pleased. He hypocritically scolded the security guard, while actually belittling me. How dare you stop, Mr. Fairchild? What, do you look down on ex-convicts? Mr. Fairchild, I'm sorry, the new staff didn't recognize you. I'll have to train them better. Garrett smiled at me, blatantly throwing his weight around in my company. I sneered. When did my Fairchild group change its name to Worthington? If Mr. Worthington has this much free time, you might want to pay more attention to your own mess of a business. Garrett's face immediately darkened. You! He pointed at me, but stuttered, unable to come up with a retort. Audrey, who had been silent for a long time, finally spoke up. Eamon Fairchild, are you here to apologize to me? How the tables have turned. I raised an eyebrow. What do I have to apologize to you for? Audrey snorted coldly, saying in a mocking tone, Is this your attitude for apologizing? I warned you last time before you left. If you regretted it, you'd need to kneel and beg for my forgiveness. You're really overthinking it, I calmly replied. I never said I regretted anything. On the contrary, this divorce with you is final. Audrey, I've already filed for divorce in court. Today, even if you don't want a divorce, it's happening. A rare look of shock appeared on Audrey's face. What? Divorce proceedings? Eamon Fairchild, how dare you? How dare I file for divorce, you ask? Well, you should ask the gentleman beside you. I interrupted Audrey with a cold smile, nodding towards Garrett. After all, if it weren't for the evidence he sent me, this divorce process wouldn't have gone so smoothly. Garrett's eyes widened. Eamon Fairchild, so that day you were deliberately? Garrett, What on earth are you two talking about? Audrey frowned in confusion. But how could Garrett dare to admit what he had done? He turned his head away, scratching his hair in frustration. While Audrey was still in a daze, I walked past her, heading straight for the company elevator. I stopped outside the security room at the company. Entry required identity verification, but my fingerprint had long been deleted by Audrey Thornton. 3 years ago, on the night Audrey got me drunk and used me to access the company's internal systems, everything should have been recorded by the security cameras. However, the cameras mysteriously malfunctioned that night, leaving no evidence to prove my innocence. I had always been troubled by this incident, suspecting someone had deliberately tampered with the surveillance system. Suddenly, I remembered that Winifred Chamberlain's son, Bertram Lowe, worked in the company's security department. Audrey didn't know about this, so there was a good chance Bertram was still employed at the company. Clinging to this faint hope, I called Winifred. A few minutes later, Bertram came out of the security room. "Mr. Avery, I'm sorry. I didn't know you were coming. I hope I didn't keep you waiting long," he said. I chuckled lightly. "No worries, don't be so formal." Bertram used his Face ID to let me into the security room and led me to his office. I explained my concerns to him, and he furrowed his brow in thought. He said hesitantly, "Mr. Avery, I think I understand what you're after. You want to restore the footage from that night to get evidence proving Miss Thornton framed you, right? I'd be happy to help, but it's been 3 years, and the malfunction was reported at the time. I can't guarantee that the video can be recovered." I knew it wouldn't be that easy, but how could I give up without trying? I asked Bertram, "Can we still find the camera from my office back then?" Bertram quickly replied, "It should be in the company warehouse, but it might take some time. If you want it, Mr. Avery, I'll do my best to find it." I patted Bertram's shoulder. "Good. Be careful and don't let Audrey catch on to anything." After instructing Bertram, I prepared to leave the company. But when I reached the lobby, I saw Audrey sitting on a sofa waiting for me. Unlike her previous disdain towards me, she actively tried to pull me down to sit and talk. I shook off her hand nonchalantly. "Audrey, if you have something to say it quickly. I don't want to waste time." Audrey suppressed her anger and said, "Garrett has already told me that you don't have any evidence. You're just bluffing, aren't you? Eamon, I can understand that after spending 3 years in prison, you're feeling resentful and want to attract my attention by filing for divorce. I'm willing to give you another chance. How about this? You don't need to kneel and apologize to me. Just pack your things and come home with me now, and we can pretend nothing happened." "Wait," I interrupted Audrey, scratching my ear. "What did Garrett Worthington tell you?" "That I have no evidence." Audrey nodded instinctively. I snorted and pulled up my chat history with Garrett on my phone, showing it to Audrey. Her expression froze in shock when she saw the contents of the photos. She snatched my phone, frantically scrolling through each picture in disbelief. I mocked, "Casually spreading intimate photos of you two as a tool to show off, Audrey. The man you found really is a perfect match for you. I wonder, besides me, how many other people has he shared these with?" Audrey collapsed onto the floor, muttering, "Impossible. I don't believe it. I need to ask him about this." She seemed to suddenly have a purpose, hastily grabbing her purse from the table and rushing towards the exit. 3 days later, I received a call from Bertram Lowe at home. "Eamon, I found that surveillance footage, but the situation is a bit complicated. Let's talk in person." "All right," I agreed. I casually grabbed a jacket and opened my front door. To my surprise, I saw Audrey Thornton walking towards me. She angrily thrust a piece of paper in front of me. It was a court summons. Apparently the court was quite efficient. Audrey's voice trembled slightly with rage. "Eamon Fairchild, how could you actually file for legal proceedings?" I was confused. Audrey's tone made it sound as if I had committed some unforgivable crime. "Audrey, I simply filed for divorce due to your extramarital affair. Is that so unbelievable? If just a summons has upset you this much, have you considered how I felt when you personally accused me in court?" resulting in my 3-year prison sentence. My words made Audrey's breath catch. She lowered her head uncomfortably, her gaze shifting. I walked past her, intending to drive away, but Audrey grabbed my sleeve. "No, Eamon. I don't believe you can really leave me. You're just trying to teach me a lesson, right?" Her voice gradually softened, taking on an almost pleading tone. "Eamon, I wronged you back then and I apologize, but you're out of prison now, it's all in the past. Why do you have to keep dwelling on it? Please withdraw the lawsuit. Can't we just live happily together like before?" I pulled my sleeve from her grasp and replied coldly, "Go back to how things were with me? What about Garrett Worthington then? Are you willing to let him go too?" Audrey mistakenly thought I was agreeing to her request. Her eyes lit up instantly and she hurriedly said, "Give me some time, Eamon. You know I can't just erase Garrett from my heart so easily. Give me 5 years. No, 3 years. I promise I'll fully come back to you after 3 years." Ha, so she meant to stay with Garrett for another 3 years? She really was playing around. I shook my head. "Forget 3 years. I can't wait even one more day. Audrey, I want to sever all ties with you immediately." Audrey's face instantly darkened. "Eamon, what do you mean?" "Audrey, the only reason you think we were happy together before is because I was always accommodating you. If you could see things from my perspective, my position, you'd realize that ever since marrying you, I've lived each day filled with self-doubt and emotional turmoil. In the past, on every night Audrey didn't come home, I would lie awake, repeatedly wondering if I wasn't good enough. I would unconsciously compare myself to Garrett, thinking I must be inferior to him, which is why I couldn't keep Audrey's heart. But now I understand, it's not that I'm not worthy, it's that Audrey isn't worthy. For me, she was never the right person." I spoke slowly and deliberately. "Audrey, I've chosen to divorce you not just because of your false accusations years ago. It's because I've realized I no longer love you. Why should two people who don't love each other stay together?" Audrey Thornton stared at me in disbelief. She probably couldn't fathom how someone who once considered her more important than life itself could now say he no longer loved her. Her eyes instantly welled up, and in the next moment, large teardrops rolled down her cheeks. "No, Eamon, how can you not love me? You're still angry with me, aren't you? I was wrong. I truly know I was wrong. Please, please don't give up on me." Audrey pleaded desperately, her words dripping with anguish, her face already covered in tears. But I just looked at her, expressionless. At this moment, no matter how haggard and pitiful Audrey appeared, it wouldn't stir even a ripple in my heart. "The divorce decree will be issued soon. Take care of yourself." I left her with these words and turned to leave, not intending to engage with her any further. Suddenly, Audrey screamed behind me, "What about the kindness I once showed you? Eamon Fairchild, don't forget who pulled you out of that fiery hell." My steps halted abruptly, and I turned stiffly to look at her. Audrey gave a bitter smile and reiterated, "Eamon, even if it's just to repay that kindness, you can't leave me. Don't forget, if I hadn't stepped in to help you, you'd still be a thief despised by everyone." Audrey's words instantly transported me back to our university days. In my second year, our class funds mysteriously disappeared, and the thief left no trace. Everyone naturally cast suspicious glances at me, only because I wasn't sociable and always kept to myself back then. They pushed me violently into the mud, hurling the vilest insults, calling me a thief and scum. No matter how I tried to defend myself, no one was willing to listen to a word I said. Just as I fell into the mud pit once again, my body and face covered in filth, on the brink of despair, a girl stood in front of me. Although my eyes were caked with mud and I couldn't see her face clearly, I still remember her resolute words. "What right do you have to slander someone without any evidence? This is illegal. I can vouch for him." On the day in question, he was alone on the rooftop reading, while I was playing the piano in the top floor classroom. "If you don't believe me, you can check the CCTV footage. I'll take responsibility for every word I've said." Under the girl's insistence, my classmates hesitated. They finally left me alone, dispersing reluctantly. It wasn't until 2 weeks later, when the real thief was caught, that I received belated apologies from this group of people. During those 2 weeks, I often received encouraging letters, all written by the girl from that day. We became pen pals, exchanging letters every other day. By my 3rd year, she said she wanted to meet me. I was thrilled and went to the lakeside where we had agreed to meet early in the morning. But for some reason, I waited by the lake until midnight and she never showed up. A week later, Audrey appeared before me, smiling and telling me she was the girl who had helped me. "Well, have you remembered everything now?" Audrey Thornton stepped forward, taking my hand and rubbing it against her cheek. "Eamon, come back to me. You'll always owe me, you know." I stared at Audrey, who was trying to soften me up, but my mind couldn't connect her with the girl from that day. How could that girl, who hated evil so passionately, falsely accuse me of so many things just for the sake of her first love? "Don't believe her." A clear voice snapped me out of my thoughts. Elsie Avery emerged from the corner, carrying a basket of fresh vegetables. These days, Elsie often brought food to make sure I was eating properly. Seeing her walk towards me, I couldn't help but smile. Somehow, I had grown to depend on Elsie. "Eamon, don't believe what she's saying." Elsie's large eyes were fixed on me. She was breathing rapidly, as if making a big decision in her mind. Finally, she bit her lip and said, "The person who helped you back then and exchanged letters with you wasn't her at all. It was me." "What?" I stared at Elsie in shock. But suddenly, everything seemed to become clear in my mind. Could it be that I had mistaken the person all along, and Audrey had just been impersonating someone else? Audrey suddenly lunged forward and shoved Elsie's shoulder. "What nonsense are you spouting? Get lost." As Audrey reached out to push her again, Elsie grabbed her wrist firmly. She said sternly, "The one talking nonsense is you. I never imagined that all these years, you've been using my identity to get close to Eamon." Audrey yanked her hand away, rubbing her wrist with an unnatural expression. "You, stop making things up. I'm talking to my husband, so if you know what's good for you, you'll leave now." As if the word husband gave her great confidence, Audrey clung to my arm and whined, "Darling, we're family. Don't let this hussy's words come between us." I coldly pulled my arm away and asked Audrey very seriously, "That person from back then, it wasn't you at all, was it? How could that be possible?" Audrey was clearly panicking. She urged, "Eamon, let's go home and talk about this. You're just being deceived by her words." "Is that so?" Elsie called out to Audrey. She pulled up her old high school ID on her phone and held it out to Audrey. "Back then, Eamon often read alone on the rooftop. This is how I was able to provide his alibi. And as it happens, the building where Eamon read was used for high school students' music practice. You, being a second-year university student then, couldn't have accessed it. Isn't that right, senior?" Elsie's persistent and confident tone gradually merged with my memory of the girl who had stood up for me. I pushed Audrey away and couldn't help but embrace Elsie. "Elsie, it was you all along. I'm so sorry I got it wrong." The evidence was irrefutable. Audrey Thornton finally gave up struggling. All she could do now was beg for mercy. "Eamon, I'm sorry I deceived you. But it was all because I love you. After 8 years together, don't you have any feelings for me at all? 8 years. How could I not have invested true emotions?" But all that passionate, intense love had long since been exhausted by Audrey's repeated betrayals and deceptions. I swept a piercing gaze over Audrey. Frightened, she shrank back and withdrew her hand that had tried to stop me. "Audrey, leave yourself some dignity," I said. I shielded Elsie and said softly to her, "Elsie, let's go." At the coffee shop, Bertram Lowe was surprised to see I had brought someone with me. I explained, "Don't worry, she's one of us." Elsie took the initiative to greet him. "Hello, I'm Elsie. I'm Eamon's sister." She looked dejected as she said those last 2 words. Bertram didn't think much of it. After warmly greeting Elsie, he got straight to the point. "Mr. Fairchild, I found the surveillance camera, but it was indeed damaged. I'm not sure if it recorded the video from that day or not. I asked, you mean if we can repair this device, we might still be able to get that video footage, right? Yes, but the problem is the repair is extremely difficult. We can hardly find anyone capable of doing this job. At this moment, Elsie quietly raised a hand. Maybe I could give it a try? I have a teacher who's very knowledgeable about these kinds of devices. Bertram hesitated. Is this teacher of yours reliable? After all, this surveillance camera is very important. If anything goes wrong, we'll truly lose that footage forever. Let her try, I said. I took the camera from Bertram and handed it to Elsie. Thank you for your help, little sister Elsie. Elsie nodded, but seemed to be holding something back. After seeing Bertram off, Elsie still hadn't said anything to me. Just as I was about to leave after taking her home, she called out to me, Eamon. Her voice grew softer and softer, barely above a whisper as she said, now that we've cleared up the misunderstanding from back then, would you consider me? So this was what she had been conflicted about all day. I teased her on purpose. What did you say? Your voice was too quiet. I couldn't hear clearly. She quickly waved her hands. Nothing. I'm going home now. With that, she turned and ran off in a flash. Watching Elsie's panicked, fleeing figure, I couldn't help but chuckle softly. Behind her, I silently mouthed my answer, yes. Ever since I rejected Audrey Thornton that day, she had been constantly harassing me with text messages and phone calls. However, this situation only lasted for a week, after which she went silent. It all stemmed from that Sunday evening. Elsie Avery excitedly knocked on my door, holding a USB drive in her hand. She said enthusiastically, Eamon, we did it. We succeeded. I instantly understood what she meant. The video from that night 3 years ago had been restored. We took this footage to report Audrey Thornton, and the police immediately ordered her arrest. I finally regained control of the company I had been separated from for 3 years. The moment I sat back down in my office chair, I let out a long sigh, feeling a sense of relief I had never experienced before. A month later, Audrey Thornton was apprehended while on the run. Furious, she reported to the police that everything was Garrett Worthington's idea and exposed his years of illegal operations. Based on the information provided by Audrey, the police successfully tracked down Garrett Worthington. However, by this time, Garrett had been tormented into a shell of his former self due to owing large amounts of high-interest loans. He went mad just 3 days after being imprisoned. Of course, I learned all this in my spare time through news reports in the social section. Although their fates were somewhat lamentable, it was ultimately deserved. I put down the newspaper, grabbed my car keys, and left the Fairchild Group building, driving towards Elsie's tea house. She hurried downstairs wearing a white dress, smiling as she asked, What's up, Eamon? You were looking for me? I got out of the car and opened the passenger door for her. Come on. I'm taking you to a beautiful place. When my car stopped next to a sea of flowers, Elsie couldn't help but exclaim in amazement. Wow, it's so beautiful. She got out of the car and lowered her head to gently smell the fragrance of the flowers. I stood behind her, holding a bouquet of roses I had prepared earlier, and spoke softly. Elsie, will you be my girlfriend? Elsie turned around in shock, and when she realized I was proposing, her eyes instantly welled up with tears. She threw her arms around me and sobbed, Yes, I will. I smiled and gently cupped Elsie's face, placing a solemn kiss on her forehead. Thankfully, it wasn't too late for everything.